First of the webinars for this year's Travel Law Conference. As in the past, Baxter Travel Media and Hyphus Crozier Law are hoping to provide some substantive knowledge in the fields of travel and law and where they intersect. We're doing it in a different format. It's purely a difference in delivery method this year. Rather than having a session in one location, we're doing a series of separate webinars, and we're going to be looking for your feedback on the difference. There are trade-offs, of course. We don't have the opportunity to network as we would normally have done, but some of the benefits are the ability to have people from other geographic jurisdictions and outside the City of Toronto. We also recognize that there's less time invested on your behalf. You can do a session in an hour and get in, get out, and hopefully take away something of merit from it. This particular session relates to paralegals. It involves myself, Doug Crozier from Hyphus Crozier Law, one of the co-sponsors, and Paul Younger of Younger Paralegal Services. The objective today is to talk about where paralegals come from, what they do, what they can't do or don't do, how they're different from lawyers and other service providers. This session is principally with respect to Ontario, but not exclusively so. It's principally Ontario because both Paul and I work in this province, and our familiarity is therefore principally with Ontario. But we recognize that one of the benefits of the webinar format is the fact that we can have people from other jurisdictions in the country watching and listening in, participating, and so we'll take that into account as well with our preparation. My understanding with this process is that if you have a question at any point, you can go to the chat box at the bottom of the screen, and at any time you can type in a question. Emily is our traffic cop here. She'll respond to some questions if they're technical or with respect to the delivery of the webinar. And if there's substantive questions that are for Paul and I, we'll take note of them. We may answer them or try to answer them in the course of the session. More than likely, we'll take note of it and return at the end of the session, time permitting, to 20 questions. If there are questions that we don't get time to deal with today, we'll try to follow up with you after the fact. There will be an email that will go out to all of you from Baxter in the days to come. It'll contain coordinates for Paul and I, answers to questions that we don't get covered today, website addresses that we'll be referring to, and a variety of resources. So feel free to take your own notes, but there hopefully will be a follow-up document that will be of use. As you can tell, this is our inaugural run, so please bear with Paul and I as we get underway. I'd like to start by giving the overview of the context within which paralegals operate in Ontario. Lawyers is an all-encompassing term that covers what those of you that watch American crime dramas know as attorneys. It covers both barristers and solicitors. Barristers are the lawyers that litigate, go to court. Solicitors are the paper-oriented lawyers such as myself. Lawyers in both streams, barristers and solicitors, have been regulated in this province since 1797. It's a self-governing profession. There are some public appointees on the benchers, which is the board of directors that regulates the profession, but by and large it's a self-regulating profession. To a certain extent, it's like the travel industry with TICO. It's not, the travel industry isn't quite as self-regulatory as the legal profession is, but there is an element of self-scrutiny that's the trade-off for, I guess, a limited monopoly, be it in travel or in the legal profession, that provided the profession that knows itself best, does a good job of regulating itself, then it has a certain degree of monopoly. That's why people that want to sell travel in Ontario have to be licensed. That's why people that want to practice law in Ontario have to be licensed. A statute here in Ontario in 2006 that opened the door to the licensing of paralegals was the Access to Justice Act. And it indicated that the Law Society, which is the regulatory body, has to exercise its mandate of regulating the profession in a manner that is consistent with the public interest. The underlying rationale is that there has to be consumer protection and to ensure that consumers of legal services have access to the providers of services that are competent and of high quality. In the profession, there's also secretaries and legal assistants that typically work with and for lawyers. They're often tremendously skilled. The practical knowledge that they have is of great assistance to the lawyers. Oftentimes you'll find that lawyers know that something can be done, but it's the legal assistant that knows how it can be done. So it's a good tandem of lawyer and assistant often in working. There's a parallel there with the travel industry. You will all know that book learning is not the same as practical experience. I don't want to denigrate book learning, but I certainly remember from when I first started to practice that all the legal education that I had at university I thought was good, but it didn't help me on the first day on the job as I had to wrestle with concepts that I'd never seen other than in theory. I had to go off to courts that I didn't know where they existed. I had to review documents that I'd never seen before. And it's that sort of practical knowledge that is relevant, and oftentimes it's a legal assistant that brings that to the table. The third player are the independent consultants that have evolved to address areas where lawyers either don't have a legislative monopoly, and that's the trade-off for the self-regulation, having the monopoly, and there are some areas where only lawyers are allowed to participate. But there are also a lot of areas where lawyers don't have a monopoly, and there are areas where lawyers either don't want to venture or they would like to, but they can't do it in a cost-competitive manner. Oftentimes you'll see in the larger cities, ethnically based travel agents will often also provide what in the past used to be called paralegal services, assisting with income tax, translations, sending of money back and forth between countries, dealing with the immigration process, translations, that sort of thing. There's also been the development of a variety of specialties where non-lawyers have been able quite competently and at a competitive cost for consumers to develop an expertise in things like immigration. There's a whole tribunal regime that deals with the immigration issue. Landlord and tenant, small claims court, traffic offenses, the ex-coppers and the points are paralegals. And there used to be in Ontario notaries public, who used to have a far higher role and profile than they do now. But that's more of an historic anomaly than something that you're currently going to find. So when you've got lawyers, you've got legal assistants that work with lawyers, and you've got paralegals who are working in some of the areas that lawyers have the ability to work in. There were increasingly calls to regulate paralegals. Part of it was due to consumer complaints, consumer losses, consumer protection concerns. And in that, the paralegal profession echoed the path that the travel industry took in the 1970s, where it had been an unregulated profession, and because of concerns for consumerism, regulation came to the travel industry in the early 70s. Once the principle was established or accepted that there was going to be regulation of paralegals, the next question was, who's going to do it? Will it be a government bureaucracy? Will it be a paralegal-specific regulatory body? In the end result, it was decided it would be the Law Society of Upper Canada. The LSUC is the regulatory body that all lawyers in this province have to belong to, and which regulates and disciplines lawyers. And it was about 5 years ago that they also took on the task of regulating paralegals. With that as background, let me give us a working definition of what a paralegal is, so that then we can start to get into chapter and verse of what's involved. We're going to say that a paralegal is an individual, not a company, but an individual, who's qualified through either education or experience to be licensed by the Law Society to provide legal services to the general public in specific areas that have been identified by the Law Society. So that's the book learning definition. In practice, as you all know, reality is wonderful with its nuances. What I'd like to do now is to call in Paul Younger to help us to understand what this definition means in practice. What is a paralegal?
Thanks, Doug. What is a paralegal? A paralegal is an individual authorized to practice law, or should I say practice law with certain restrictions. Whereas a lawyer can help you with all your legal needs, a paralegal is restricted. So what's a paralegal scope of practice? In Ontario specifically, paralegals provide important advocacy services for clients appearing before specialized tribunals established under active legislation in Ontario or under Acts of Parliament. Such examples of these include, but are not limited to, Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, Financial Services Commission of Ontario, the Landlord and Tenant Board, and the Ontario Labour Relations Board. And of special interest to today's audience, the Travel Industry Council of Ontario and the License Appeal Tribunal. Now, we're all familiar with the Travel Industry Council of Ontario, so let me briefly expand on the License Appeal Tribunal. The License Appeal Tribunal is an independent adjudicative tribunal created under the License Appeal Tribunal Act to hear appeals and issue written decisions based on evidence presented by the parties. And now there are certain statutes that are covered by the tribunal's mandate, and I picked out two for their relevance: the Consumer Protection Act and the Travel Industry Act. So if you're an Ontario registered travel agent or tour operator, and TICO for some reason has chosen to suspend your registration, then this is where you would appeal, and this would be an ideal situation for a paralegal. Paralegals are also permitted to act in summary convictions court under the Criminal Code for offenses where the maximum penalty does not exceed $5,000 fine or an imprisonment of 6 months or both. And some examples of those kind of crimes would be fraud, forgery, theft under $5,000, possessions of weapons in various degrees. I think the two most common areas of practice for a paralegal, and where most people are familiarized with paralegals, are the Ontario Court of Justice under the Provincial Offences Act for various matters. And this is, as Doug mentioned, the ex-coppers and the points. This is where they find most of their practice. And the more common is finally small claims court for damages for property for $25,000 or less. And this is an area of considerable potential for travel companies. I should also note that in Ontario, paralegals can negotiate and provide advice and draft documentation involved with the previous mentioned proceedings, even if the intent is for them not to appear. So if you have someone prepare your materials and you intend to appear on your own behalf, this is also something a paralegal can do for you.
So that helps to get some flesh on the bones of the definition of a paralegal. Paul, I'd mentioned earlier on the idea of secretaries, assistants, law clerks, paralegals, lawyers. Can you elaborate on the relationships among them and how they fit together in the grand scheme of things?
Well, I think the first thing to clarify, because people confuse the two on a regular basis, that law clerks and paralegals are not the same. Whereas a paralegal is permitted to provide legal services and is regulated by the Law Society of Upper Canada, a law clerk is not regulated and must at all times report to the direct supervision of a lawyer. Now, in Ontario and only Ontario, both paralegals and lawyers are required to be licensed by the Law Society of Upper Canada and be members in good standing. Both are required to carry professional liability insurance, often referred to as errors and omissions, or E&O, in order to protect themselves and their clients, and both must complete continuing professional development programs to further our practice. Further, lawyers and paralegals have rules and bylaws to regulate their ethical conduct, and I think it's important to highlight that the public is better served by having licensed and regulated paralegals. It helps maintain the integrity of the profession while ensuring that individuals are competent and comply with all the ethical rules of conduct or for their permitted legal services. Now, there are a couple areas that paralegals and lawyers differ. The first are fees, and paralegals vary from paralegal to paralegal and lawyer to lawyer, but I think it's safe to assume that for the most part a paralegal is much more affordable. There are also certain situations where a paralegal is restricted from giving advice or practicing, and therefore you must use a lawyer. For the most part, there are a lot of things that a paralegal probably has the competence to handle, which fall outside the scope of their practice and are what they are not allowed to permitted to do. For those things, you can still get the benefit of a paralegal's lower cost if his work or her work is supervised by a lawyer. That is to say, the work can only be done legally by a lawyer. If that lawyer chooses to do the work by subcontracting it out to a paralegal, that's fine, so long as the lawyer is responsible for the work product. So if you want to keep your costs low and under control and are faced with the matter, a paralegal cannot on his own or her own handle legally, see if your lawyer will agree to take on the file and, with the assistance of a paralegal, with getting the benefit of a reduced cost as well as the oversight of a lawyer or paralegal's work.
So then, summarizing, paralegals are regulated, and so therefore they're not like legal assistants and legal assistants, legal clerks, who have to work under a degree of supervision. Paralegal has that degree of independence. But while paralegals do resemble lawyers in that they're regulated, there are also differences because there's things that paralegals cannot do by law, again, in Ontario. We can explore later on those areas that paralegals can engage in, but for now I want to deal with the idea of how one becomes a paralegal, so that our audience today has a sense of what sort of credentials, what sort of experience, what sort of book learning a paralegal will have if they do search out a paralegal to help them with their issue. I said earlier on in that definition that paralegal is somebody who has acquired that status by education or experience. Let's deal with education first, Paul. What sort of education is required in order to be credentialized by the Law Society as a paralegal?
Well, firstly, in order for a candidate to apply to the Law Society of Upper Canada for a license, he or she must have graduated from an accredited legal service or paralegal program. Now, by the start of the 2012 year, this fall, there will be 34 accredited institutions across Ontario providing the paralegal education programs. For the most part, these programs are 2 years in length. Some programs are condensed. But for the most part, all schools have to offer a minimum of 830 program hours comprised of the following: 590 instructional hours in compulsory legal courses within a paralegal scope of practice, 120 hours of field placement, practicum or work experience, and 120 hours of instructional hours in addition to courses to support a well-rounded college graduate. As a prerequisite for all of these mentioned accredited institutions, you are required to have an Ontario Secondary School Diploma or the equivalent, and with some schools, an entrance aptitude test. Upon completion, graduates of accredited programs are eligible to apply to the Law Society for a paralegal licensing process. Now, the process consists of two parts: the application process and the licensing examination. The Law Society offers 3 dates per year for all students that graduated in Ontario. And once they are approved to write the licensing examination, it's a 3.5-hour exam, which is particularly difficult. Once the process is complete, then the candidate is then allowed to petition the Law Society for a paralegal license, and once in receipt, they are allowed to practice law.
So that covers the formal educational approach to licensing as a paralegal. The definition had also referred to the idea that one can become a paralegal by virtue of experience. Could you elaborate on that for us, Paul, as to the other route of becoming a paralegal licensed by the Law Society?
Well, the experience criteria for the Law Society is a much different, or was a much different route to becoming a licensed paralegal. And I say was a option because it is no longer available. There were two experience routes to becoming a paralegal. The original, the grandparenting license process, which happened when the Law Society began regulating paralegals back in 2006. At that time, candidates who were previously working as a paralegal or in a similar capacity were given a one-year option for a license, and that option ended in 2007. The second route was the exempted group integration process. And at the time, the Law Society of Upper Canada offered a unique opportunity for the collection agents and exempted group members, which I'll explain a little more in detail, by offering the ability to become licensed as paralegals without having to take the full education route referred to earlier. The applications, or applicants, were given a 12-month window commencing on October 1st, 2010 and ending in September 30th, 2011, and all approved applicants were then given a deadline to complete the process, including the licensing examination, by May 2014. In addition to collection agents, the exempted group consisted of in-house legal service providers, legal clinic employees, human rights legal support staff, and municipal prosecutors, and a handful of various other professional services. As for the requirements, the individual was required to have a minimum of 3 years experience in their field and provide legal services in conjunction with their occupation. Provide references and meet a good character requirement. They also were required to complete the Law Society of Upper Canada's online ethics and advocacy course, which consisted of a 60-hour program. And once successfully completed, they were then authorized to write the paralegal licensing examination, the same exam that the educated students were required to write. And then the licensing process was complete, which was all future paralegals must complete the education portion, which is a minimum of a 2 years accredited program.
Thanks, Paul. So then we've got paralegals that come to the profession through either of two routes, experience, which is now a closed door, and education. They've got the ability, presumably if they've met the criteria and been licensed, but they can only practice in certain specific areas of the law. We established that in the definition and in Paul's earlier remarks. The next portion of today's session is to ask Paul to zero in on what those areas are. Specifically, what are the areas that a paralegal such as you, Paul, can help a travel company like those run by the people in the audience today with their legal needs?
Well, as Doug and I both mentioned before, there are some things that paralegals can do, and there are some things that paralegals are not allowed to do legally and undertake on their own. With respect to files in the latter category, we can give you the benefit of a lower expense if we handle the matter under the supervision of a lawyer. The cost savings can still be had even though the lawyer's oversight of the work. All you'll have to do is ask your lawyer if he or she is amenable to that approach on the file, or if the paralegal you've approached, perhaps they already have a lawyer arranged to work in this process. So let's take a look at a typical travel business's legal requirements and try and segregate the services to two categories. The first areas to address are issues related to the regulatory bodies that govern the travel industry. Where a paralegal is not allowed to handle the business registrations or the annual filings, complete the application processes or things of this nature, we are able to assist our clients resolving disputes related to the Travel Industry Act. And there are a lot of compliance-related issues, but in a couple areas that stick out, those being consumer complaints and issues related to advertising through various media. Also mentioned earlier, we have the ability to appeal suspended licenses should the situation arise. There are some specific matters that do fall, however, under the paralegal scope of practice. And for travel companies, or any company for that matter, a paralegal is ideally suited to resolve disputes. Whether the disputes involve wrongful dismissal or harassment or discrimination, whether they're insurance-related matters that fall under the Financial Services Commission, or Workplace Safety Insurance Board matters. And of all these things, I think the small claims court matters should be expanded a little more and are the most relevant for the travel industry. A paralegal is well suited to issue demand letters and or pursue in court various collection matters. Whether it's collecting on behalf of a supplier for a commission that is owing, or an ex-staffer who owes money to the company, or perhaps a client who has not paid their bill or has done a chargeback. A paralegal is responsible and well-versed at drafting and responding to consumer complaints. More specifically, complaints surrounding breach of contract, misrepresentation, personal injury, breach of duty of care, and then defending all these small claim court matters should it get to that point. There are numerous opportunities for a paralegal to assist a travel company. Now, I mentioned that paralegals are permitted to work on their own in those areas, but they're not permitted to assist with various day-to-day business transactions and corporate-related matters. Whether that involves the incorporation of a company, managing the corporate minute books or records, drafting terms and conditions or preferred supplier agreements, commercial leases, or any of the day-to-day common documents. These numerous documents all present ideal situations for the company to save money by hiring a paralegal to complete the work, but under the direct supervision of a lawyer. As long as that paralegal is competent and has the experience in this sort of work. Numerous paralegals have pre-existing experience in drafting and dealing with all these documents, so it is an ideal situation to save money. Now, there's numerous opportunities and issues that a paralegal, either working individually or in tandem with a lawyer, can assist a travel company, whether it's a tour operator or a retail agent. And I urge you that if there are any areas that are gray, to send in a question, email Doug and I personally, so we can clarify those, because it is a very large, encompassing area.
So, having established how paralegals have come into existence in a regulated way in Ontario, and having identified the areas wherein they can carry on their profession either individually or under the supervision of a lawyer, the next obvious question is, how does one go about finding a paralegal? If a member of the audience was interested in following up on the ideas of today's session, Paul, what resources are available? What can he or she do to track someone down?
Well, there are numerous resources available to find the right paralegal for the job, and I think the easiest place to start is by taking advantage of the internet, whether it's through using a search engine to specifically highlight the areas of a legal practice that you require. For example, typing in small claims court paralegal in Toronto with travel law experience and seeing what appears on your browser. Then you have the option to peruse through the various paralegals that are available to you. You also have the ability online to access various paralegal referral services through some of the paralegal societies or paralegal associations. Now, most of these services refer to paralegals that are only members of their association. So your results may turn out to be somewhat limited, but it's not a bad place to start. Another great place to start is the Law Society of Upper Canada. Utilizing the Law Society as a resource has a couple benefits, and there's a couple ways you can do so. There is a lawyer and paralegal directory, and I understand at the end of the session we'll be sending out to today's registrants a list of materials, and we will send the website for the Law Society of Upper Canada to you as well. You can search the database for their paralegal and lawyer directory by name, by city, by postal code, and each listing will provide you with a detailed record of that paralegal or that lawyer for that matter, tell you if they have any disciplinary history or if there's any restrictions on his or her practice. Now, starting next week on May 1st, the Law Society has now decided to expand its its referral service to include paralegals, which is a fantastic option for both consumers and paralegals. The referral service, which I believe Doug might be able to confirm, has been around for about 40 years. And the deal behind that is you enter a name or an area of practice that you require assistance in and your location, and it will give you the name of a paralegal or a lawyer in your community or near your community with that specific expertise. It also provides you with a free consultation of up to 30 minutes, which, as most people know, that consultation will expand beyond 30 minutes. But it helps you determine your rights and what options you have moving forward. This consultation can be in person, and it can be by phone, and in the end up being by call, or it will help you decide how you want to proceed and move forward with costs. Now, as with other referral services, not all paralegals will be involved, depending on the Law Society. If a paralegal is committed and wants to pay the annual fee, their name will be included in the database. Again, we will provide the coordinates once those are available for the Law Society's referral program and for their member directory. The one major benefit about utilizing the Law Society's database is it guarantees that your lawyer or your paralegal is a member in good standing, and that includes with their professional liability insurance. Another suggestion, which is probably the best suggestion you can have, is ask a colleague, a family member, or a friend for a referral. They are great resources for recommending good legal advice. I think it's important that you should always be prepared prior to going into your consultation, though, with a paralegal or a lawyer. By utilizing your time to your advantage, by having all your materials prepared and any questions going forward. It's very important that you utilize the time you have.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to give Paul a chance to have a drink of water and field a question that has come in that perhaps is available on everyone's screen. The question relates to the areas of specialty and expertise. In theory, just like any lawyer in Ontario can tackle any issue, the fact of the matter is that some lawyers specialize in areas and not in others. Any paralegal licensed in Ontario is capable of handling any of the areas that Paul has referred to as being within the area of demarcation that they can practice in. But the reality is that a lot of them will probably specialize. Some will say that they're better in one area than in another. The paralegal profession is following the travel industry, which followed the legal profession. The lawyers had about a 400-year head start in terms of developing specialties and expertises. But just as the travel industry is becoming more and more professional and more regulated, and so are the paralegals, you'll find over time specialties will develop. Lawyers have reached the point in Ontario where they can apply for and be certified as specialists in particular identified fields. That hasn't yet happened with paralegals. Perhaps I'll live long enough to see that day come. The short answer to your question, therefore, is that any paralegal should be able to field a question that you've got in a particular area, but you will find by asking that some of them will have more expertise and more experience in those areas than others, and that's just all about being a wise consumer of legal services. You've got to ask those questions and try to find out what he or she has in the way of experience in those areas.
I think just to kind of add to what Doug just said, there are specific areas that if you do look, and Doug had mentioned ex-coppers and I think another ticketing, those are paralegals and they specifically focus their practice on traffic-related offenses. And there are some paralegals that have been registered for some time that do have specific practices. I think but right now with paralegal, because it is not necessarily a new field, but one that is rapidly developing, every paralegal or most paralegals are trying to encompass as large of an area as they can in order to make their business move forward. But there are certain legal firms that do specialize in either personal injury matters or traffic offenses.
And that will lead us into the next question. It'll come as no surprise that there's a bit of a script that Paul and I are following here. This is not just an ad hoc conversation we're having. The next question is premised on that same sort of fact situation that Victoria had asked. We're assuming, as we've gone through this, that we've identified how paralegals are licensed through the education and the experience routes, and we've talked about how you can go about finding them through websites and the referral services and so forth. I'd next like to take us to a situation where you, member of the audience, have identified the paralegal that you want to speak with. I'd like to ask a paralegal, Paul, what his potential client should be doing in the run-up to that first interview, so as to make most efficient use of the time, as he has said, and to get to the nub of the matter as quickly as possible.
Sorry, I was just looking at some of the questions that had pulled through the screen. One about designations and to find out if a paralegal is in good standing. If a paralegal is in good standing, they will be registered on the Law Society's webpage, and if they're not in good standing or if they've had some sort of disciplinary action, I believe it then says they're suspended or list in detail what that action is. If they're not a licensed paralegal, they're not a member of the Law Society, and they won't be on their webpage or in their database. So again, when the material now, another question I just noticed, that are paralegals connected to a law firm or a host? Some paralegals do work at law firms, but once they do work at law firms, yes, they are a paralegal, but they take on a different role, more of a law clerk type of role, where they do report directly to a legal, a lawyer for their expertise. When identifying a paralegal, I think the first thing that any consumer should ask is what the experience is, your type of matter, and if that paralegal has the expertise to handle that, because the expertise is really the guiding factor, not the cost of a paralegal. Now, as we mentioned earlier, paralegals are required to carry professional liability insurance, so make sure that your paralegal does have insurance and does have the required coverage. Don't assume they have the coverage. Make sure you confirm that, whether it's by asking for a copy of their certificate of insurance, which they should have no issue in providing to you. You can't stress enough how important it is to confirm that your paralegal, or your lawyer for that matter, does have insurance coverage. Ask a paralegal to provide you with some references. Every paralegal should be able to provide you with some form of references, and when you do receive them, call them. Don't just look at the references and assume that they are in fact there. Make an effort and call them, whether it's make the 3 calls. And find out how much they charge and whether they charge an hourly rate, if they handle on a block rate, or on contingency fees. Ask for an estimate, but at the same time, remember that all legal matters are unique and different. So without receiving all of the information, it's hard for a paralegal or a lawyer for that matter to provide you with a fair estimate, but they should be able to give you some sort of information. Find out if you're going to be billed on a monthly basis, or if you're going to have to pay a lump sum at the end of the matter, or if there are any additional costs that are above and beyond any of the hourly rates or fees that entitle. And disbursements and I'm assuming court filing costs come to mind for some of those things. I'm not sure if Doug can think of a couple more. Ask about a retainer letter, or whether or not it will be a money retainer or a written retainer. A money retainer being money that's provided up front as a deposit, as security, for payments of fees and disbursements. And if that is the case, find out if your paralegal has a trust account, because any money that is handed into as a retainer is required by the Law Society to be put into a trust account, with the interest going to the Law Foundation of Ontario. So in that case, your check would have to be cut to Peter's Paralegal and Trust, or whatever the case may be, or a written retainer, and the written retainer just being an agreement in writing between the paralegal and the consumer, respecting the amount of payment and the services that are provided. And most importantly, before you pick any paralegal and lawyer for that matter, do go to the Law Society's webpage and do make sure they are a member in good standing. There are, unfortunately, still individuals that put forward the image that they are a paralegal, and when they are in fact not, and may try to dupe you into using their expertise when they are not actually licensed to handle your file. Now, some things that you may want to take into consideration when you actually do meet your paralegal, and these are some important areas that probably should be addressed. Most people read better than they hear, and lawyers and paralegals for that matter are the same. And if you can write down a summary of your matter in a detailed manner ahead of time, and you can provide that to the paralegal or the lawyer, it will give you and the paralegal a better assessment of your situation, maybe give them a better estimate, and it actually will save you some time and make your initial interview in a shorter manner. When you do arrive in person and you do meet with your paralegal, and again, for a lawyer that matter, bring all the documents you have to the meeting. It's very important to bring all relevant documents to the table so that your paralegal or lawyer can review them. It assists the paralegal in assessing your case and helps determine some of the strengths and weaknesses of your case. The documents will also assist them in understanding the legal issues of your case. And there are numerous legal issues that need to be addressed with every case. So providing everybody, or the parties, with all the documentation up front is essential. Often the documents will bring you or make differences that help relay any needed information that may be missing from your poor memory, if that may be the case. Make a list of questions in order to assess the strengths and weaknesses of your case. We encourage you to prepare your questions beforehand. Write them down. Bring a notepad. It's fine to bring a notepad, and no question is stupid. That's the one key that everybody should remember. There is not a stupid question out there. So make sure you ask every question that you need. And be open and completely honest with your paralegal, and again, for that matter, with your lawyer, because all facts are important, including the facts that you believe may be not good for your case. They should always be discussed prior to your meeting with a paralegal or with a lawyer. And if you want a reliable assessment of your matter or your case and an estimate, you need to be completely honest, because honesty is always puts you in a better position.
I can certainly endorse all that Paul has said, in particular the idea of preparing the outline beforehand. There are so many facts that you will know and understand that the lawyer or paralegal won't, even down to names and interrelationships. If you've got a complicated fact situation, a consumer complaint, for example, passengers have gone to a destination and they've either at destination or upon their return lodged a complaint. You know who Bob and Bill and Mary and Sam are and how they relate each to the other, but the paralegal won't. Even if all you do is provide a cast of characters in advance of the meeting, it'll help to make the meeting go more quickly and more efficiently. Just going to try and field a question that's on the screen here now about should we use a paralegal for a TICO registration. It's not necessary. As with a lot of things, you can do a TICO application on your own, just like you could file your income tax on your own. It's a question of cost-benefit analysis. It's sometimes better, however that word is defined, to spend money to have an accountant or a tax service do your income tax return rather than wrestle with it yourself. Sometimes it's better to do it yourself because you better understand what's involved. That's for you to decide. You don't need a lawyer, you don't need a paralegal to do the TICO application, but you may find it's better in the long run to spend a buck, have someone who has some experience with the forms and what is required to go through the process, and you may get to the finish line a lot more quickly and with a lot less heartache and headache by doing it that way. That goes to the question of expertise that was asked earlier on by another one of the members of the audience. All paralegals, I would expect anybody that's licensed as a paralegal would be willing to take on the challenge of dealing with a TICO application, but not everyone is going to be able to do it as quickly and as efficiently because they don't all have the same expertise. That's one of the filtering out questions that you should be asking when you're kicking the tires of the paralegals that you're looking for. What sort of experience have you got? What sort of success rate have you got? How quickly do you think that this is going to be able to be done? And then we'll take it from there.
Do you think we've addressed the expertise, the travel expertise question sufficiently?
Yeah, the question is how do I find paralegals with travel expertise specifically? Word of mouth, certainly. Talk to others in the travel industry if they've made use of paralegals. Our law firm does a lot of work in the travel industry, and we can certainly help you with people that we've come across that do work in the travel industry, like Paul, as opposed to others whose name may not be known to us. You can ask directly, and then going back to one of Paul's suggestions as well, just the search engine. If you Google that you're looking for a paralegal in Ontario with travel industry expertise or experience, you may get hits beyond what you would get if you didn't put in that extra parameter.
I think for travel expertise as well, not only with law firms, it's not very common that somebody addresses they have travel, or a couple of other law firms that I've found when I've done searches, and the same with paralegals. It is a travel expertise in certain aspects, but a lot of times it can be specifically just a small claims court expertise. So when choosing a paralegal, you may, if you can't find somebody that specifically fits the area of expertise you need, that paralegal is trained to learn or to expand their horizons to encompass that area. They're familiar with the small claims court or the landlord and tenant tribunal, and they may not have experience in your specific area, but it equally is easy for them to learn that or move into that area. And recommending resources, again, the web page is invaluable. Searching for paralegals, there's hundreds that you can pull up, but if you pinpoint specific areas, for example, travel expertise, you will hopefully pull up some names.
And then the responsibility still is with you, the consumer, to make sure that the names that come up do have the qualifications that they profess. Just because somebody professes an ability doesn't mean he's got it, and that's for you as an enlightened consumer of legal services to make sure.
And I think that's why it's very beneficial to utilize friends, family, colleagues, the lawyer that may have done your closing on your house. Now, they may not be a litigant, but they obviously have been in the community, and the legal community is a lot tighter than people would assume, and they're more than likely to know somebody that can assist you or to point you in the right direction. So friends, family, colleagues, that's probably one of the best resources you can utilize.
We've made parallels during the time we've been with you today with the travel industry on a number of occasions. I'd like to zero in on another one. As all of you who are TICO licensed will know, just getting the license from TICO isn't the end of your relationship with the regulator. There's ongoing, going forward oversight by TICO of registrants. It won't come as a great surprise to find out that the Law Society continues to look over the shoulder of paralegals after they've been licensed, and that's the area of the next area of questions for Paul is what sort of post-licensing oversight does the Law Society exercise, and what sort of comfort does that give then to consumers such as yourselves of paralegal services?
Well, every year or calendar year, regardless of the company or individual's fiscal year end, paralegals are required to file an annual report and giving baseline data about their practice. They're also required to, again, in some circumstances, complete the good character requirement for the Law Society. And the good character requirement is simply a list of questions that, as it sounds, make sure you're of good character, whether that's a question relating to have you ever committed a criminal offense, has your license ever been suspended. Everybody has seen these forms before. Has a judgment been made against you in the past? So that's another area where the Law Society steps in and makes sure that they're covered. Both the Law Society and the Law Foundation of Ontario monitor the paralegals' trust accounts, similar to the way that TICO would monitor travel companies' trust accounts as well. The Law Society has also implemented practice audits for paralegals, and I believe they do the same for lawyers.
Absolutely.
The audit is designed to identify practice management issues which, if neglected, could impact the quality of legal services that the paralegal or the lawyer provides. And I don't know the numbers. The stat that I saw for last year is they randomly selected 74 paralegals in Ontario and audited their practice. And the audit consists of checking their journals, their ledgers, their trust account, their document storage, their privacy, various things to encompass everything to make sure that that the paralegal's practice is operating in a good manner. And I assume it's the same for a law firm. Yeah.
Yep. other provinces? We've been talking about Ontario, Paul. What's the story in other provinces?
Well, in preparation for today, I searched online and was trying to find out more information about paralegals around Canada and different provinces. And after coming up with no hard facts, I ended up calling the law societies for every province. And actually was surprised to find out that Ontario is the only province that regulates and licenses paralegals to run their own practice and to offer legal services. For the most part, the role of a paralegal in other provinces was very much similar to that of a law clerk, meaning that they do have to report directly to a lawyer, whether it's within a law firm or a sole practitioner. Not only was I surprised to find that out, because I have run into instances in the past where I've dealt with paralegals from other provinces, but the law societies seem to be very surprised, at least some of them were, that Ontario's paralegals were licensed and able to offer legal services. I did hear some rumblings from some provinces, and again, it was only speculation or rumor, that some of them are looking at leaning towards the same area as Ontario when it comes to regulating paralegals, but there's actually been no steps forward in that area. I do think it's important, though, to recognize, though, that even though they may not be regulated or licensed as a paralegal in the capacity that one is in Ontario, that they do offer similar services to a paralegal and can be cost-effective and cost-saving by utilizing their lawyer's supervision. So I think if you're outside of Ontario and you do have a circumstance where, gee, I don't want to spend a lot of money on this matter, perhaps I can get a paralegal to do it. Let's see if the lawyer that he's working with will allow him to do the work or her to do the work, and then just have that lawyer review their work in the background. I did come up with a couple web pages that I stumbled across in my search, and again, it didn't provide any information about regulating the paralegals, but one of the web pages was the Alberta Association of Professional Paralegals, and the other was the BC Paralegal Association. Now, the coordinates to both of those will be provided in our handout at the end of session, or whenever that material goes out. And those should provide you with a little more information on paralegals in British Columbia and Alberta. I did not find any information on any other provinces online, the odd blog post or similar to that, but those are the two only provinces that actually had associations affiliated with paralegals.
Can someone who's outside of Ontario contact a regulated paralegal in Ontario to ask for assistance?
The paralegal that is licensed in Ontario cannot assist on a legal matter outside of the province. If that matter was to fall into an Ontario matter, say if it was a travel agent on the border of Manitoba and Ontario, and they had a passenger or a client that had purchased their package from Kenora, and they're in Winnipeg, that could be a case where a paralegal that's licensed in Ontario could assist that company or that individual, but a paralegal from Ontario cannot represent a client, and I don't think a lawyer can as well, for that matter, in some provinces outside of Ontario.
If you're using the court system, yes, that's true. Flip it around. Paul, you've spoken about how there are only limited areas within which paralegals can operate in Ontario, but if there's no regulation in other provinces, can somebody in Ontario contact a paralegal in an unregulated province to ask for assistance in an area that, were it to happen in Ontario, a paralegal would find off limits?
They could. Now, again, that paralegal would more than likely be reporting to a lawyer. I don't think it would be very practical from a business perspective, but they could do the work. Depending on what that work is, the law society, if it was a small claims court matter, the courts would step in and say you're not allowed to represent this company in this court matter, or the law society would step in. The law society polices the paralegal industry, or the legal industry or community, very strenuously, and they do prosecute and go after individuals that try and dupe the public by saying they're a paralegal when they in fact are not. So I don't necessarily think it would be practical for a company in Ontario to seek assistance outside of the province, but they most certainly could.
Okay. Looking back over the questions that have been posed, I think we've come up with answers for most of them, if not all of them. One I'm seeing is the idea of the actual designation. I don't think we've specifically said, there's no specific designation. That is to say, it's not as though you see a BA or LLB or any particular letters after an individual's name, the designation you're looking for is licensed paralegal, those two words, and the Law Society website, the directory that we'll give you the coordinates for, is the best place to identify proper credentialization of a paralegal in this province.
And all paralegals and lawyers, for that matter, also have license numbers and are required on their information to place the license number, whether it's filing a claim or other circumstances. I'm not sure if Doug can actually pinpoint some, but a paralegal license has a P1 number, and a lawyer's is an L1 number, I believe, an L number, something to that extent. But a license number, it was given to all licensed registrants.
Good. We're coming near the end of our hour. If there are any other questions, now's the time. I'll pause just in case and encourage you to put any questions that you may want to now before the hour is up. And also contact Paul or I directly after the session. We'll be sending that out in a few days with the various coordinates and so forth. Seeing no other questions coming in, let me thank you for your attention. I've been on the receiving end of webinars in the past, and it is interesting to be on the other side for a change.
We may have one rolling in now.
There are other webinars in this series that will be coming. The travellaw.ca website identifies the topics, the speakers, and the dates. They all start at 1 o'clock Eastern. We'd also be interested in knowing how you found today's session. Did we cover substantively the material you had expected? Did you find it to be worthwhile or not? And also questions on the delivery methodology. I'd be interested to know whether you would like to have received written material beforehand, or whether after the fact is okay, or not at all. Is it more of a visual learning experience and you don't need anything in writing? Any of those comments will be helpful as we evolve into the webinar format that Baxter and we at Hypas Crozier Law are committed to. Aside from that, I think we're at 1:59, so it's time for Paul Younger and I to say it's time you went back to work. Thank you for your attention.